Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I felt this was a good time to just record a quick video discussing why I have said on social media recently that I do not want to cover games that incorporate generative AI art into their product. And there are a lot of reasons you could give for this. A lot of them have been spilling across Twitter and Blue Sky and Facebook and Board Game Geek because Terraforming Mars' new expansion from Stronghold blatantly incorporates art that has been generated via AI. So I felt this was a good time to clarify some of my positions that are deeper than just it's stealing, although it is stealing. Midjourney especially, which Stronghold has admitted that they used, is based on and trained on images that are scraped from the internet without attribution and without compensation for the artist that they scraped from. So when you put a search query into something like Midjourney and you get a response back, you're getting responses that are amalgamated from artists who may not have consented to having their art used. And that's just a base problem for me, and it's a very big one with AI right now. But I think that beyond sort of legal technicalities, copyright stuff, there are a couple of really important reasons why we should hesitate to embrace AI, generative AI specifically, in games. And I wanted to kind of talk through where I'm at right now on this, because I've been thinking about it a lot. And I think that if we don't speak up now, then, when is a good time to speak up? Because this is the moment where if anything is going to be culturally set for board games, it's now. And, maybe what I say won't mean anything and I can't fix anything, but I have to try, and I also want to get my position out there because speaking up is the right thing to do in a situation like this. So there are three really big overall concepts I want to talk about as we go through this little ramble. All right, so the first aspect of this that I want to talk about is basically just the issue of doing your own work. I, as somebody who spent 6 years getting a PhD and who learned how to write historical papers and who actually learned the dead languages that I worked in, have, I would say, probably a very intense set of feelings about doing things the long way, but the right way, and actually achieving mastery over your subject area. And I can't help but feel the way that I feel and then look at artists and feel a lot of sympathy for them. It takes a lifetime to become a very, very good artist. Even if you don't really consider yourself an artist, you're like, oh, I'm just an illustrator. I'm just a graphic designer. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of expertise building to become good at that. And I think that one of the discussions of AI that grosses me out the most is the idea that you can elide over all of that work and all of that mastery and create something that's just as good. My biggest pressure point is when somebody says something like, oh, AI, it's the democratization of art. Like, what? No, the democratization of art would be giving everybody enough leisure time and access to learn how to do art themselves and take pleasure in the process. It's not giving everybody an outcome that they couldn't otherwise achieve in 2 seconds because that would be easy. That's skipping the entire process of what makes art valuable. All of the practice, all of the thinking, all of the drafting, all of the intentionality that goes into a really, really good piece of art. That's something that you're willing to throw away for the sake of convenience. And I think that's gross. I think that's gross on a human level, just taking credit for something you clearly can't do. But I also think it's gross as a teacher. It really upsets me because my students are also starting to think this way because society is making them comfortable thinking this way. And it bugs me when I have a very transactional relationship with my students. Very often they're very focused on the end product of what they make. But what they don't understand is what I'm watching is the process. When I ask students to write a paper, I don't necessarily care about the end product as much as I care about being able to see the research, the building of the argument, helping the student decide what they really want to say, helping my student pick really good backup for the arguments that they want to make. All of that is a process that you cheat yourself of going through when you use AI to generate something in 5 minutes. And not being able to do that process yourself both makes what you create more hollow. I think that that's both aesthetically true and morally, ethically, internally true. But it also means that you're essentially taking credit for an end product that you really yourself were not able to create. And so if I'm grading what you learned as a teacher, I can't take something from AI and see it as an expression of what was learned. I can only see it as an expression of what was produced. And I think that being obsessed with production in that particular way is a problem. It's a problem for the soul of humanity. It's also a problem for the kinds of products and art and experiences that we consume in our lives. And so to me, AI feels a lot like cheating. It feels a whole lot like taking somebody else's work. Maybe I put something into a search engine. That doesn't make me an artist. And it doesn't make anybody an artist. You have to actually make art to be an artist. Just like you have to actually write to be a writer. And just like you actually have to play games to be a game reviewer. And I think that leads to the next part, which is that this AI discussion pains me, in part because I'm somebody who takes games seriously. Games actually mean something to me. They are meaningful. They are not just throwaway. They are not just product. They are expressions of a human mind, several minds by the time somebody's done working on a game. But I'm always really interested in what was the designer's intention behind this game. And a publisher can also put some intentionality on things, but the real idea, right, is that a designer designs a game. They go through the publication process, and ideally, the game emerges as an expression of something that they really wanted to put into the world that was their intention, that the players have an experience that the designer intended, and that everything in the game, including the illustrations, the art, lends itself to that process. And so when I'm assessing games, especially because I prefer historical games, I like games that I can take very seriously and I can get really into the subject matter. So one thing that really bothers me about this is that I don't want to live in a world where I can't tell whether something that is in a game was the author's actual intention for the game, or whether somebody was being lazy and it's just a computer mock-up, but it adds to the overall impressions that I'm getting from the game. Like, how can I interpret what you're saying if I'm not even sure that you said it? And I feel like this is going to lead to partially things like, oh, well, you just misunderstand me. The AI said that. Well, I mean, you published it. But I think that it also means that when I'm, say, looking at a detail of art on a card, can I understand this as something that a designer and an artist talked about and created together? Or is this a detail that just appeared in whatever the computer crapped out and they kept it because it looked okay and nobody really, really thought about it? And because art is communication, because games are communication, I think that letting somebody else do the saying for you is a bad idea. I think that you should buck up and say what you mean, clear as a bell, and that you should say it yourself. And I think that working with an artist is part of that. So for Night Witches, I don't want to disclose who we've been talking to because it's not official out there in the world yet. But, David Thompson and I have been talking to an artist about Night Witches. We had a really good conversation about, what vibe do we want our game to give off? What do we want these women to convey in images of them? And how are we going to make that happen? And we've also been talking about graphic design. What can we do to communicate really clearly about this game so that people know what to do with a minimum amount of frustration? But that's a human process. Everything in Night Witches is David's and my intentions, even if they go through somebody else. And I think that there's something that's really important about that. Like, every detail of this game is intentional. And if it wasn't, how could you assess me as a designer through my game? I feel like the real issue with AI art is that it's not really intentional. Like, even if you put a query in, the AI doesn't really understand the things that you're asking for as real emotions or as real objects. It's just using keywords that's been trained on to create kind of a collage of ideas that it has that then puts into the art that you get. It doesn't have intention. It doesn't have feelings. It doesn't know how to convey. Only a person really knows how to do that. So maybe AI can approximate something like that, but it's never going to be a true human expression. And that's what I want to critique. I don't really care what a computer is able to do. I want to know what you have to say. And I think the last thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of like a weirder discussion because I don't think there's like a one-to-one correspondence between these things, but there is kind of a connection for me, I think, as somebody who does board game media. So I also think there's a connection between treating art and illustration as a product and not as art. And also our current complaints about content and content creators, etc. So, the big Quackalope explosion happened over the summer. But, I see all kinds of discussions periodically about, oh, well, you can't trust content creators. And, oh, nobody ever really talks about games anymore. Nobody ever gets really deep into games anymore. Like, when am I going to get some real critique of a game? And, like, we talk a lot about what is real critique. Does it mean you have to be negative about games? Like, what kind of depth are we supposed to go to? I routinely see people say, well, how many times did you play this game? It's weird because we verbally hold media people in board games to a high standard. But then in practice, if you look at what we're consuming, that's not necessarily true. And I worry that with art, we're just going to go wholesale down the content route. Like, I actually really despise having my work referred to as content, even though because of our vernacular, like, I slip and refer to my own stuff as content sometimes. And then I feel really bad and angry at myself after I do it. Because in my opinion, what I do isn't content. What I do, maybe you can call it media. Maybe you can call it criticism. I think my podcast is something else. But everything that I make is something that I really did make in interaction with a board game, but I have real intentions behind my work, and those intentions sharpen over time. I don't view what I do as just filler. I do not view my work as the intellectual equivalent of cheese food, and I also don't want to treat games that way at all. In fact, you might have noticed that a lot of the game reviews that I'm choosing have changed over time, because I no longer want to just review any old thing. I want to review something that means something. And I feel the exact same way about art that I consume. I want to look at something that means something. And I think that you can't sit there and just gulp down a bunch of AI art and then complain also about the boringness of content, because you're basically trying to make your art the same way. And one day you are going to look at a game and you're going to realize that your connection isn't really there. Maybe you really like the people across the table, but the game itself isn't doing much for you. And you're going to wonder why. Just like when you watch yet another samey board game video, you're going to wonder why. Why am I watching another unboxing that's just like all the other unboxings? It's because we, through our behavior, have accidentally put ourselves on an eternal diet, like mental hospital food, where games don't mean anything anymore. And where the human connection is gone because it's completely left the game. The game has no spark of the life of the designer left in it. And we also don't either. I think there's a lot of things that I've touched on in this video. Like, I'm not even sure this is a coherent argument. I'm just talking at this point. So I'll kind of draw it down. But basically what this boils down to is I don't believe that AI can make things that resonate sufficiently with humans because it lacks humanity. Even if it looks like a good illustration, you're still going to limit yourself in terms of seeing new things that are actually creative or fresh, seeing things that you can connect with quite as heavily. Like right now, even really good pieces of AI quote art, like I notice my eyes kind of slide off them. Like even if they look lush, they're just not that interesting. And it's because they're not really saying anything. They don't have anything to say. And I'm interested in engaging with art, including board games, that has something to say. So I guess the conclusion of all of this is, I say this to myself and everybody else. Like, we're living in a world where people want us to keep accepting good enough as something that we should be satisfied with. And I do believe that AI can create something that's, quote, good enough. But is that really what you just want for yourselves in every board game you play, in every bit of visual media you try to engage with, in every text you read? Nobody actually wants to look at that stuff. Nobody actually wants to read it. Why do you think you skim over so many work emails? I mean, nobody wants to read stuff that doesn't really have anything to say. And I think that that's true both in terms of reading literally and also reading in images in board games. So if you've got something to say, you should be saying it yourself. You should know how to say it yourself. And if you can't do the art yourself, you should know how to communicate with an artist, a human artist who can actually understand, interpret, and breathe life into the vision that you have. Because everything else is just kind of like the whitewashed tomb of biblical literature. There are also people who think that teachers can be replaced by a computer or by a script. And I can tell you that basically by the interactions I have with students, that's definitely not the case. I taught through COVID. The kids don't want to learn on a computer. But also, you can't teach somebody from a script. Even if all the information is there, it's the connection and the art of teaching that brings out real learning and that brings out a real connection in the classroom. And I think that's also true with board games. If you if you want the board game to be something special and not just an activity, not just content to fill up your days, then you need to have intentionality about it. And to have intentionality about it, you need a person. So that's where I'm at with this. Unless something drastically changes in the future, I will not be covering any games with generative AI. I think they're theft. And I also think that it's creatively bankrupt, and I won't have it. So thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and most of all, happy gaming.